Welcome back, guys. It's chapter 17. This chapter is on manifest destiny and its legacy. My name is Dr. Chris Erskine, and we're going to get into this top-up lesson in U.S. history. So let's go ahead and start. Two threads this chapter that we're going to talk about. Part 1 is going to be manifest destiny and Mexico, and part 2 is going to be on what we call sectionalism, and we're going to get to that in part 2. But manifest destiny and Mexico. Mexico meaning the Mexican-American War, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that here, but you're going to read about that in your textbook, and you're going to have some questions about that on your worksheet, and you will have vocab, and you will also probably see questions on the Mexican-American War on your test. So look at the next slide that we have, and this is a picture of Texas and Mexico and the United States. What I really want you to look at is that Texas, if you know what a picture of Texas looks like today, the map, it looks nothing like this. And that's because of the Mexican-American War. Now, this map is from 1836 to 1845. Texas originally was part of Mexico. Originally, it was part of Native American lands, and then it became part of New Spain. But now, at this point, it's part of Mexico. Mexico wanted to attract Americans to come live on this land in Mexico. And the Americans came and they brought their slaves. But then Mexico outlawed slavery. And just a couple of years later, the Texans decided, no, we want our slaves, and we're going to declare ourselves independent. The Americans in Mexican Texas. And so they had a revolt, a revolution. They declared themselves the Lone Star Republic, and for just about a decade, they are their own country. Now, in the context of American expansion going west, we have this idea of manifest destiny. Now, I can promise you this is a word on this slide, this phrase, these two words, that you will have to know for a test or a worksheet or in the American language. You should know this. Americans understand this idea of manifesting or bringing forth our destiny, our God-given right, is how Americans often think about this, to take over the entire continent of North America from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, we did talk a little bit about this in a previous chapter, but it's such an important part of what kind of how Americans behaved during that period that I want to spend a few moments on it here as well. So Texas declared independence in 1836 because Mexico tried to end slavery. Okay? The United States annexed or took over Texas in 1845. Now, there were continuing border disputes between Texas and Mexico, and President Polk sent the army to Mexico, and a lot of historians believe that he sent them down to the border hoping that the Mexicans would start and push back. And he also crossed the border, although he claimed later that he didn't cross the border. Crossed over into Mexico to force the Mexicans to defend themselves. When the Mexicans defended themselves, the American troops fought back. And so Polk was able to claim that Mexico started the war, but it wasn't actually true. The United States increased, after we gained this territory from Mexico, we increased the size of our country by about 50% under President Polk. And in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, we gained all of this Texas and a lot more than just Texas, and we're going to see a map in just a moment. But these states that we gained are part of Oregon. If you look at the bottom of this Manifest Destiny slide, it says Oregon, California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado. I mean, that's massive. We increased by half the size of the country. That's just so much new territory that we gained. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see a map of the United States, and this is what the map looks like in 1849. Now keep in mind, manifest destiny. We're continuing to push further and further to the west. We're going to see that map again in just a moment. So the Mexican cession. Now, what do we do with that land? We now have all of this new land. What do we do with that land? How do we separate it? Because Americans, they want land. They want to push west. But the problem is, as soon as we get this new land, we have to decide, is this new land going to be a slave state or a free state? And at this point, the Congress, the amount of government officials in slave states and the amount of government officials in free states is just about the same, almost equal. And so they don't want to give one side too much power. And so Congress has this big problem. You've got all this new land. What do you do with it? How do you make this now part of the United States without creating a war? And so Congress comes up with this plan, and it's called the Compromise of 1850. North Texas, and we saw the map of Texas before, protrudes or pushes up into areas north of the Missouri Compromise line. Now, if you remember from a couple of chapters ago, we see that the Missouri Compromise cuts right across the middle of the United States, and north of that line there cannot be slavery. South of that line there can be slavery, but Missouri itself was north of that line, and it kept its slaves. And that's why it's called the Missouri Compromise, because Missouri got to keep its slaves. And also Maine at that time came in as a free state, so it kept that balance. But now, what do? And so North Texas is north of the Missouri Compromise line. Texas has huge debt from fighting its war with Mexico. They spent so much money, and they now owe a lot of money to people that had loaned it money. California, Utah, New Mexico, should these new places be slave or free? And slaves in the South are running away freely to the north, and the Northerners are not doing anything to stop them. So there's some territory that, what do? It's not organized at all. It's just new land. It's not California or Utah, it's just land. What do you do with that? So look at the next slide, and you can see in 1849 what the map looks like. And this is right after the Mexican cession. But we've not organized that new land. Now look at the next slide. You'll see after the Compromise of 1850, you see now California is now it's now a state, and it's part of the United States. You'll also notice that Texas looks different. And there's unorganized territory to the north of Texas. Now I want you to go back for just a moment to 1849 and get a good look at that. And then come back again to 1850. Now this next slide that I want to show you says American expansion. And as you look at this slide, you will see that it's a GIF file. And so what you will see is this gradual push, this gradual growth and expansion of the United States, all the way from the beginning of 13 original colonies and states, all the way to today. Now we're going to cycle through this a few times, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that you're going to see. Now, first thing that you're going to see, of course, and I just mentioned this, but notice everything pushing west gradually. The next thing that you will see is territory turning from gray to orange or pink. That means that the United States has taken that territory from another country. Maybe they took it from Spain. Maybe they took it or bought it from France. The next thing I want you to look at as you cycle through this several times is, for just a brief moment, the southern part of the United States turns green. And that's because during the American Civil War in 1861 to about 1865, the South does not consider itself part of the United States. So actually for about 4 years there, you have a separate country, the Confederate States of America, or they're trying to become a separate country. So this is a really fascinating picture, map of how Americans expanded in their ideas of manifest destiny, all the way from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So that takes us to the end of this slide, this chapter, actually. And I just keep in mind these things: manifest destiny, Americans push for the West, and that's chapter 17, part 1. And we're going to move on to part 2 in just a little bit. So we'll see you back here in just maybe later in the week, or maybe we'll see you back here in a few minutes. All right, take care. Bye-bye.